as like a very like present dad, like with his children. So
in the scorched deserts of Arizona, beneath a sky painted in bruised steel, one of reality TV's most complicated families gathered for a farewell they never imagined. What should have been a quiet funeral for Garrison Brown quickly twisted into something much larger. An unmasking of secrets, a collision of pain, and a test of whether decades of fractures could be mended by grief. The silence was heavier than words. One by one, cars pulled into the narrow gravel drive. Tires crunched with the hesitance of people who had not stood side by side in years. Hands gripped door handles, but lingered just a moment longer, as if searching for the strength to step into this fragile reunion. A family that once called itself whole now stood fractured, carrying wounds of jealousy, betrayal, and favoritism like invisible chains. Faces emerged from car doors, familiar yet transformed by time. Some carried flowers, others shoved their hands into pockets, eyes pinned to the ground. The awkward stillness between them was undeniable. The old wounds of polygamy hovered in the air like unhealed scars, unseen but cutting. They stood at uneven distances, caught between the urge to retreat and the need to face each other. Even the desert wind held its breath, as though nature itself respected the delicate silence of this fractured family. The voice of the narrator cut through the stillness like a pulse, reminding everyone of what this family once was, bound by faith, unconventional love, and choices that shaped their legacy. Yet now, here in the cold shadow of loss, faith and titles meant little. What mattered was whether this family could survive grief without tearing itself apart. Each glance was its own question. Each step forward, a gamble on how much pain could be set aside for one afternoon. They came for Garrison, the son who once tied their separate worlds together, now gone too soon. Could his absence become the bridge between them, or would it rip the fault lines open wider than ever? The answer lingered unspoken, a heavy cloud waiting to burst before the day was done. Then an object appeared that shifted the air completely. At first, it was only a silhouette in the pale light, a vessel small enough to cradle yet powerful enough to carry an entire legacy. Hand-carved, sanded, and built with devotion, Mitch had created a Viking-inspired ship as Garrison's final resting place. Every curve, every line, every nail told a story. The bow curled like a question mark, daring the world to answer. The prow, shaped into a dragon, honored Garrison's favorite myths. Shields lined its sides, echoes of the walls he built to protect himself from pain. And the base was weighted with Arizona mesquite wood, grounding his memory to the land that raised him. It was not an urn, it was a statement. A vessel that transformed grief into mythology, binding the memory of a son with legends of warriors and dreamers who believed death was not an end, but a passage. For a moment, the cemetery no longer felt like a graveyard. It became a harbor, a place where Garrison prepared for one final voyage into the unknown. Family members stepped closer, hands trembling as they reached out to touch the wood, fingertips lingering as though they could still feel his heartbeat carved into the grain. The air grew heavier. Silence wrapped around them, yet in that silence there was motion, an invisible current pulling them together, forcing them to face the truth. This was more than a funeral. This was a reckoning. Soon, tokens began to appear, each one carrying a weight no words could express. A pair of worn military dog tags clinked against the vessel, their metal edges carrying the echo of orders once shouted and duties once fulfilled. A faded baseball cap, its brim still bent the way Garrison liked it, landed next, a reminder of his discipline and laughter. Then came a floral shirt, loud and unapologetic, defying the muted tones of grief as if Garrison's humor refused to be buried. More followed. A carved childhood keepsake, a reminder of the boy who once carried luck in his pocket during deployments. Each object became a chapter, unfinished yet immortal. The pile grew, forming not just a tribute, but a constellation of memories mapping the life of a man gone too soon. With every item placed, grief became heavier, no longer an idea, but a physical weight pressing down on everyone present. By the time the final token rested in the vessel, the air was thick with both reverence and revelation. These weren't just props. They were proof of a life that once filled every room with noise, laughter, and struggle. In this ritual, the family shifted from clinging to letting go, surrendering fragments of Garrison's story to the ship that would carry him onward. For one fleeting moment, they weren't just gathered around a grave. They stood around a living archive, memories layered so densely that even silence felt crowded. And in that silence, one question whispered louder than all. Could they carry him forward, even as his body stayed behind? He stayed behind? That night, somewhere between waking and dreaming, a shadow of comfort crept into the silence. There was no creak of floorboards, no soft swing of a door, just a sudden weight in the air. A presence so real it pressed against the skin as though it belonged there. When he turned his head, he didn't see a ghost or a distant echo. He saw Garrison, sitting at the edge of the bed, shoulders relaxed, face calm. Not the stiff image of a soldier cast in memorial, but the boy from before life became heavy. The half-smile, the steady eyes, the warmth that once lit up a room, all returned. The silence between them stretched until it became its own language. Finally, the question spilled out, the one he had carried like a stone pressing into his chest. "Why are you gone, boy?" Garrison's reply came with the ease of a secret. "I'm not. It's not that bad here, Dad. Stop listening to the sad music. It drags me back when you hurt. But I'm okay. I promise." The words felt like both a bomb and a balm. They shattered the wall of grief, yet soothed a wound too deep for time alone to heal. Whether dream or visitation, it didn't matter. The effect was undeniable. When morning came, the room was still, but something inside him had shifted. The bitterness that once corroded every family encounter began to dissolve, replaced by a fragile tenderness he thought he had lost forever. The narrator called it a hinge moment, the door between memory and message swinging open. Was it just exhaustion? Or had Garrison truly crossed the veil to guide his father back toward life? Whatever the truth, the encounter left behind a seed of peace. For the first time since his son's death, grief opened a door instead of closing one. The moment no one rehearses arrived like lightning. At the carved Viking ship, the mother's fingers trembled across its ridges. The vessel was heavier than she had expected, yet strangely weightless, as though she held both absence and presence at once. Murmurs of relatives fell away, footsteps stilled. She cradled the urn the way she once cradled an infant, not as wood, but as life. And then she turned. For the first time in years, she faced the man she had long treated as a stranger. For one heartbeat, they were not estranged spouses, not reality TV characters, not rivals in faith or love. They were simply parents, broken by the same loss. She studied his hands, rough and weathered from pride and stubbornness. Would they even touch hers? The pause stretched into eternity. He stood frozen, eyes locked on the vessel as if afraid it might vanish if he dared to blink. Their history flickered between them, the marriages, the births, the betrayals, the endless arguments, collapsing into a single unspoken truth. This was their child. She extended the urn. Slowly he reached out. His hands trembled, hovering as though he was about to catch a falling star. When the wood touched his palms, the transfer was not ceremonial, but tender, deliberate. It bypassed every grudge, every headline, every scar. For a fleeting moment, the world shrank down to the sound of 2 breaths and the faint thump of 2 breaking hearts. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but the possibility of it. Their eyes met, not with blame, but recognition. The recognition of the person who once gave him a family, the woman who once stood beside him at the beginning of everything. In that instant, absolution shimmered in the air, fragile as glass. And before anyone could see what came next, whether he would weep, speak, or turn away, the screen cut black, leaving viewers gasping on the cliff of choice. Then color crashed into the grayscale. Out of the muted palette of black coats and sober fabrics, a Hawaiian shirt blazed like rebellion. Hibiscus pink and palm green danced across Tim's chest as he stepped from his car, looking more like a man arriving at a barbecue than a burial. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, confusion, then realization. This wasn't disrespect. It was devotion. The shirt bore the name of a dream few outsiders ever knew, Bob's Floral. Garrison's whimsical vision, a business pairing bright shirts with bold bouquets. A running joke that had once filled kitchens with laughter, napkins with doodles, and imaginations with hope. He had promised Tim he'd be the perfect model for their launch. Now, under the shadow of loss, Tim kept the promise in the only way left. He stood like a neon sign among stone faces, a living tribute to the boy who refused to live small. And it worked. Smiles broke through tears. Someone whispered, he would have loved this. He would have roasted Tim for not ironing it. He'd have posed for pictures and turned it into a meme before sundown. Even his mother, eyes swollen from weeping, almost laughed. It was wrong and perfect at once. Exactly the contradiction Garrison adored. She remembered how he wore mismatched socks to military drills just to see if anyone noticed. That shirt became more than fabric. It became a rebellion against despair, a reminder that mourning doesn't have to be colorless. The tension cracked. A collective exhale swept through the crowd. For a moment, grief stopped feeling like a cement wall and softened into a tide. In the middle of gravestones and whispered prayers, Tim's Hawaiian shirt shouted the truth no sermon could. Garrison was still here. In color, in laughter, in the audacity to live bold. But then, silence reclaimed its ground as a small circle formed. They stood apart from the family, men and women bound not by blood, but by service. Soldiers, brothers in arms. The posture was unmistakable. Straight shoulders, hands clasped, eyes steady, discipline etched into their bones even while their hearts cracked beneath the weight of loss. One comrade stepped forward with a cap worn thin at the seams, Garrison's first commissioning hat, creased where he bent it to shove into his rucksack. Another carried a brass casing, the very first bullet Garrison fired in training, polished dull gold by years of being rolled in his palm like a talisman. These were not trinkets. They were artifacts, proof of a life built on service, sacrifice, and brotherhood. Each item placed beside the Viking ship was more than memorabilia. It was testimony. Rank and legacy made tangible. The story of a soldier whose duty left marks deeper than the world would ever know. Deeper than the world would ever know. His mother stood still, watching the soldiers and siblings place tokens beside the Viking ship urn. Pride flickered through the storm of her grief, a pride sharp enough to cut. For the first time, she realized just how much of her son's life had unfolded beyond her reach. She remembered late-night calls from base, his voice steadier than his years, speaking with confidence that sometimes startled her. His laughter had softened, yes, but his sense of duty had only sharpened. Every token that touched the earth landed like punctuation in a sentence cut too soon. Dog tags, hats, medals, each one a chapter that proved the story of Garrison Brown might have ended early, but it carried the full weight of a man who lived many lives in one. Silence deepened. Then a salute rose, slow, deliberate, final. One hand to a brow, a gesture so simple yet so enormous it compressed a universe of respect, allegiance, and farewell into seconds. A ripple followed. Others mirrored the motion. The narrator's voice tightened. In this single movement, family and uniform dissolved into something larger. A brotherhood beyond blood. A roll call that death cannot erase. Folded flags, muted medals, stoic faces, they weren't props, they were testimony. This was the final chapter of a man who carried both the warmth of the sun and the weight of a soldier. The Viking ship rested at the edge of the open grave, its carved hull catching the last faint glints of Arizona daylight. Around it lay the constellation of his life, the shirts, the hats, the caps, the keepsakes. A hush fell so complete even the desert breeze seemed to bow its head. Words could no longer suffice. Only ritual would. Two sets of hands, one trembling, one steady, lowered the urn. The earth seemed to sigh as it received him. Family lined up. Each was handed a scoop of soil. Some held it with both palms like it was water. Others clenched it in fists, knuckles whitening before release. Grain by grain, earth struck wood with the muted rhythm of distant rain. The narrator framed it as signatures. Personal farewells written not in ink, but in dirt. A sister lingered, lips moving in soundless prayer. A brother pressed his fingertips into the soil, desperate to leave one last fingerprint against the curve of the grave. Even the estranged father, eyes shadowed, dropped his portion. No words, no ceremony, but he stayed one beat longer, gaze unbroken. These micro-acts formed something larger, a choreography of grief. Individual chapters closing, a collective story still painfully open. As the last handful of earth covered the vessel, the ship shifted from symbol of departure to anchor, fixed in soil, fixed in memory. Yet a question hummed beneath the silence. Was this ritual a bridge toward healing, or just another scene in an endless saga of wounds left raw? The desert wind rose, carrying away whispers. All that remained was the image of the vessel sealed beneath ground, a testament, a mystery, a final crossing no one could undo. Then, the narrator's voice bent low, almost intimate. What do we leave behind? The hush became contemplation. Garrison's philosophy surfaced not as lecture, but fragments, scribbled notes, offhand jokes turned mottos. He never left a room without telling someone they'd done a good job. He photographed sunsets, built fires at camp, grinned while helping neighbors fix fences. small gestures stacking quietly into the architecture of a life. The voice urged viewers to see themselves in him, their own tokens, their own ships waiting for farewell. What would people drop into your grave? What tokens would they choose to prove you mattered? A final quote flickered across the silence, Garrison's own words, spoken long before anyone knew how prophetic they would be. Extend yourself. Make relationships so that when you're gone, someone says, "I'm glad he was here." Against Arizona's violet and amber sky, those words felt less like farewell and more like a challenge. A mirror for every viewer who tuned in for family drama and found themselves staring into their own reflection. The sky folded down like a curtain, gravestones cast in shadow. The family stood in silhouettes, edges softened by the coming night. For the first time all day, there were no speeches, no rituals, no movement. Just breath and stillness. Memory doesn't vanish with the sun. It lingers like heat in the earth. Someone squeezed a hand. Someone tilted their face toward the horizon as though waiting for a final message. The camera's invisible gaze locked onto each face, showing not characters on a show, but a family negotiating grief in real time. Then one last image. Garrison's laugh, frozen in mid-light, burning in memory before the screen cut black. But the story refused to end. Days later, in a quiet house, his mother folded uniforms when her hand brushed something hidden in the closet. A box. Small but heavy. Wrapped in brown paper, tied with cord knotted twice. Her breath stalled. His handwriting, looping and deliberate, sprawled across the label. No one had seen it before. They gathered at the table like jurors awaiting a verdict. The cord snapped. The lid creaked. Inside, a leather-bound journal, edges worn from years of secrets. And beside it, taped carefully, a flash drive. The room changed. The air felt charged, almost electric. Pages rustled. Ink filled with fragments, projects half-finished, quotes from Norse mythology, names no one recognized. Some entries ran backward, coded like puzzles. Sentences bled off the page as if too large to be contained. A sister whispered, "Do we keep reading?" A brother muttered, "Maybe it wasn't meant for us." The flash drive gleamed like a metallic question mark, untouched, waiting. The narrator slowed the moment to a pulse. What did he want them to know? The journal closed with a thud that felt like both ending and beginning. They dispersed with more questions than answers. For the first time since the funeral, the story didn't feel finished. It felt cracked open. And then, the desert at night. The cemetery unrecognizable. Black, endless, restless. Some family members returned, unable to sleep, pulled by something nameless. They stood at the mound of fresh earth, breaths visible in the cold, hearts beating in the same rhythm. Then someone saw it. A glimmer on the ridge, another, then another. Lights, faint but deliberate. A pattern. They formed the curve of a prow, the outline of a sail. A ghostly echo of the Viking ship buried below. Too precise to be random, too fleeting to be trusted. Someone whispered, "It's a vigil." Another muttered, "A prank." No one moved closer. The desert wind hummed low and steady, like voices too far away to catch. The shape held, glowing like embers in the dark. Faces shifted, hope braided with fear. Was this a message or grief inventing signals? And then, just as suddenly, the lights vanished. The ridge was black again. The silence absolute. No footprints. No firelight. No explanation. A coyote cried once, then again. The desert swallowed the sound. The narrator whispered the final question. Was it a sign? Or just the shape of grief? As the screen darkened, one truth remained. Garrison's story wasn't finished. His journal, his flash drive, the lights on the ridge, all hints that there were still layers left to uncover. And so the episode ended not with closure, but with invitation. Join us next time on TLC Soapbox. The investigation has only begun. The Soapbox. The investigation has only begun.